The morning sun shone bright over London as James Mitchell walked through the gates of Buckingham Palace. He carried his heavy rifle and wore his red uniform with pride. The tall black hat on his head made him look even taller than his 6 feet. James was 28 years old and had been a royal guard for 6 years. Every day he stood outside the palace without moving for hours. This was his job, and he loved it. James came from a small town in Wales. His father had been a soldier, and his grandfather too. When James was a boy, he dreamed of wearing the red uniform and protecting the Queen. He worked hard in school and trained his body to be strong. When he was 22, his dream came true. He became one of the famous guards that tourists from all over the world came to see. The other guards respected James. He never broke the rules. He never moved when he was supposed to stand still. He never talked when he was supposed to be quiet. Some guards found it hard to ignore the tourists who tried to make them laugh or smile, but not James. He could stand like a statue for hours without moving a muscle. On this Tuesday morning, James felt good. He had eaten a healthy breakfast and done his morning exercises. His uniform was clean and pressed. His boots shined like mirrors. His rifle was perfectly clean. Everything was ready for another day of duty. The palace grounds were already busy with workers and early tourists. James walked to his post near the main gate. This was where he would stand for the next 4 hours. He had stood in this exact spot hundreds of times before. He knew every stone on the ground and every bar on the gate. As James took his position, he checked his watch. It was 8:30 in the morning. In a few hours, crowds of tourists would gather to take pictures and watch the guards. Some would try to make him move or smile. Others would just stare and wonder. James was ready for all of it. The first tourists began to arrive around 9 o'clock. They came in small groups, speaking different languages. James could hear English, French, German, and Spanish. Some carried big cameras. Others used their phones to take pictures. A few had guidebooks that told them about the palace and the guards. James stood perfectly still as the crowd grew larger. Children pointed at him and whispered to their parents. Adults read facts about the royal guards from their phones. Everyone seemed excited to see the famous soldiers who never moved. One little boy came very close to James. The boy's mother held his hand tightly. The boy stared up at James with wide eyes. He had never seen anyone stand so still before. The boy waved at James, but James did not wave back. The boy tried to make funny faces, but James did not smile. Finally, the boy's mother pulled him away to look at other things. More and more people arrived as the morning went on. Tour guides led groups around the palace. They told stories about the guards and the royal family. James heard the same stories every day, but he never got tired of them. He was proud to be part of such an old and important tradition. The sun climbed higher in the sky. James felt the warmth on his face, but he did not move. A light breeze blew across the palace grounds, but James stood firm. His training had taught him to ignore heat, cold, wind, and rain. A royal guard must be like a rock, unmovable and strong. Around 10:30, a large tour bus stopped near the palace. 40 tourists got out, talking excitedly in Spanish. James watched from the corner of his eye as they organized themselves for pictures. Many of them had never been to London before. This was the trip of a lifetime for most of them. Among the Spanish tourists was a woman named Maria Santos. She was 34 years old and taught children in a school in Barcelona. Next to her stood her daughter Elena, who was 15 years old. This was their first trip to London together. Maria had saved money for 2 years to bring Elena to see the famous city. Maria looked around the palace grounds with wonder. She had seen pictures of Buckingham Palace many times, but being there in person was amazing. The building was much bigger than she had imagined. The guards looked so serious and important in their red uniforms. Elena was busy taking pictures with her phone. She wanted to show all her friends back home what she had seen. She took pictures of the palace, the gates, and the guards. She tried to get James in some of her photos because he looked so impressive. Maria felt excited but also a little tired. She and Elena had walked a lot that morning. They had seen Big Ben, Westminster Abbey, and the London Eye before coming to the palace. Maria's heart was beating fast from all the excitement and walking. The tour guide gathered the Spanish group together. He began to tell them about the royal guards. He explained how they were real soldiers who protected the royal family. He said they were trained never to move or speak while on duty. The tourists listened carefully and took more pictures. James continued to stand perfectly still. He had heard tour guides give the same speech thousands of times. He knew that people were curious about how the guards could stand so still for so long. Some people thought it was easy, but James knew better. It took years of training and strong discipline. The morning was turning out perfectly normal. The sun was shining, the tourists were happy, and James was doing his job well. He had no idea that in just 1 hour, everything would change. He had no idea that he would soon face the hardest decision of his life. He had no idea that a woman named Maria Santos would need his help to survive. For now, James simply stood at his post, proud and strong, ready to serve his country for another day. As the morning continued, more tourists arrived at Buckingham Palace. The crowd grew larger and more excited. Maria Santos stood with her daughter Elena, listening to their tour guide explain the history of the royal guards. Maria smiled as she watched the serious-looking soldiers in their red uniforms. Maria felt happy to be in London with Elena. This trip was something they had planned together for months. Elena was doing well in school, and Maria wanted to reward her with this special vacation. They had both worked hard to save money for this adventure, but as Maria stood in the warm sunshine, she began to feel strange. Her chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing it gently. She took a deep breath and tried to ignore the feeling. She thought it was probably just excitement from being in such a famous place. Elena was busy taking selfies with the palace in the background. She wanted the perfect photo to post on social media. Her friends back in Barcelona would be so jealous when they saw where she was. Elena moved around trying to find the best angle for her pictures. Maria watched Elena with love. Her daughter was growing up so fast. At 15, Elena was becoming a young woman. This trip to London was a chance for them to spend special time together before Elena became too busy with her teenage life. The tour guide continued talking about the guards. He explained how they trained for months to learn to stand perfectly still. He said they could not move even if people tried to distract them. Some tourists in the group laughed and said they wanted to test this. Maria felt the tightness in her chest get a little worse. She put her hand over her heart and took another deep breath. The feeling was uncomfortable but not painful. She decided it was probably because she had been walking so much. They had been touring London for 3 days and her body was tired. Elena noticed her mother touching her chest. She stopped taking pictures and walked over to Maria. Elena was a caring daughter who always worried about her mother. "Mama, are you okay?" Elena asked in Spanish. "You look a little pale." Maria smiled and patted Elena's arm. "I'm fine, mi amor. Just a little tired from all the walking. This London vacation is keeping us busy." Elena looked concerned but accepted her mother's explanation. She knew Maria was strong and healthy. Maria exercised regularly and ate good food. She was a teacher who chased after young children all day, so she was used to being active. The tour guide led the group closer to where James Mitchell was standing. James remained perfectly still like a statue. His eyes looked straight ahead and his face showed no expression. The tourists were amazed by his discipline. Maria and Elena moved with the group. Maria felt a little dizzy as they walked, but she blamed it on the excitement and the warm sun. She had never been to such a famous place before. Her heart was beating fast, which seemed normal for such an exciting day. Some tourists in their group started trying to make James react. They made funny faces and told jokes near him. James did not move a single muscle. This made the tourists even more amazed. They had heard the guards never moved, but seeing it in person was incredible. Elena wanted to take a picture standing next to James. Many other tourists were doing the same thing. The guards were used to people posing near them for photos. It was part of their daily routine. Maria felt the tightness in her chest spread to her left arm. The feeling was still not painful, just uncomfortable. She rubbed her arm gently and tried to focus on Elena's excitement. She did not want anything to ruin this special trip. Elena positioned herself near James for the perfect photo. She asked Maria to take the picture with her phone. Maria lifted the phone and looked through the camera. Elena smiled brightly with the famous guard behind her. As Maria held up the phone, she felt a strange sensation. Her vision became a little blurry for a moment. She blinked several times, and the blurriness went away. She took several photos of Elena, trying to get the best one. Other tourists were also taking pictures. Everyone wanted a photo with the impressive guard. James stood completely still through all of it. He was used to hundreds of photos being taken near him every day. It was just part of his job. Maria and Elena looked at the photos together. Elena was thrilled with how they turned out. She immediately started posting them on her social media accounts. She tagged their location as Buckingham Palace and added excited comments about meeting the royal guards. The tour guide called the group together to move to another part of the palace, but Elena wanted to take more pictures. She loved the red uniform and tall black hat that James wore. She had never seen anything like it in Spain. Maria began to feel short of breath as they prepared to move. She thought it was because they had been standing in the sun for a while. The weather in London was warmer than she had expected. She fanned herself with the tourist brochure they had been given. Elena noticed her mother breathing heavily. She suggested they sit down on a nearby bench for a few minutes. But Maria did not want to hold up the tour group. She was determined to see everything on their scheduled visit to the palace. "I'm fine," Maria told Elena. "Let's keep going with the group. I don't want to miss anything." Elena was not completely convinced, but she trusted her mother. Maria was always the strong one in their family. She took care of everyone and never complained about feeling sick. If Maria said she was fine, Elena believed her. The tour guide led them around the side of the palace. He pointed out different architectural features and told more stories about the royal family. The tourists listened with interest and took more pictures. Maria walked slowly behind the group. Each step required a little more effort than usual. She told herself it was just the excitement of the trip. Tomorrow they would go to see the Tower of London, and she wanted to have energy for that adventure too. Elena stayed close to her mother as they walked. She could sense that something was not quite right, but she could not figure out what it was. Maria seemed tired, but that was normal after 3 days of sightseeing. As they completed the tour around the palace, Maria felt grateful for this time with Elena. Even though she was feeling uncomfortable, she was happy to share this experience with her daughter. These were the memories they would treasure forever. Neither Maria nor Elena knew that something serious was happening inside Maria's body. Her heart was struggling and dangerous changes were taking place. In less than an hour, their perfect London vacation would become a fight for Maria's life. The tour group finished walking around the palace and returned to the main courtyard. It was now 11:30 in the morning, and the sun was getting warmer. More tourists had arrived, making the area crowded and busy. James Mitchell continued to stand at his post, watching everything from the corner of his eyes. Maria Santos felt worse than before. The tightness in her chest had become stronger, and now she felt pressure like a heavy weight was sitting on her. She tried to take deep breaths, but each breath felt difficult. Her left arm was beginning to ache in a way she had never felt before. Elena was still excited about the photos they had taken. She showed them to other tourists in their group and talked about how amazing London was. But when she looked at her mother, she became worried. Maria's face was pale and small drops of sweat appeared on her forehead despite the cool morning breeze. "Mama, you really don't look good," Elena said, switching to Spanish so others would not understand. "Maybe we should go back to the hotel and rest." Maria shook her head. She had paid a lot of money for this tour, and she did not want to waste it. "No, mi amor. We only have 2 more days in London. I want to see everything we planned." The tour guide announced that they had 15 more minutes to take pictures and explore before moving to their next location. Elena wanted to take one more photo with the royal guard. She had an idea for a funny picture where she would salute James while he stood perfectly still. Maria agreed to take the photo. She wanted Elena to have all the memories she could from this trip. Elena positioned herself next to James and gave a playful military salute. Maria lifted Elena's phone to take the picture. As Maria held up the phone, the pressure in her chest suddenly became much worse. It felt like an elephant was stepping on her. The pain was different from anything she had ever experienced. It was not sharp like a cut, but deep and crushing, like her chest was being squeezed in a giant fist. Maria gasped and nearly dropped the phone. The pain was so surprising and intense that she could not hide it. Elena immediately noticed something was very wrong. "Mama, what's happening?" Elena rushed to her mother's side. Maria tried to speak, but she was having trouble breathing. The pain in her chest was spreading to her neck and jaw. Her left arm felt heavy and numb. She had never felt anything like this before, and it scared her. I can't." Maria struggled to get the words out. "My chest, it hurts." Elena looked around frantically for help. Most of the tourists were busy taking pictures and talking. Their tour guide was on the other side of the courtyard, explaining something to another group. Elena did not know what to do. James Mitchell noticed the commotion near his post. He could see a woman in distress and a young girl who looked frightened. His training told him to remain in position, but his human instincts made him want to help. He stayed perfectly still, but he watched carefully. Maria put both hands on her chest and tried to breathe normally. But each breath felt like work. She felt dizzy and confused. The world around her seemed to be spinning slowly. She reached out to grab Elena's arm for support. "Elena," Maria whispered, I think I need to sit down." Elena looked around, desperately for a bench or somewhere her mother could rest. The nearest bench was 50 feet away. Elena was not sure her mother could walk that far. Maria was leaning heavily on Elena's shoulder and breathing in short, quick gasps. Other tourists began to notice that something was wrong. A few people stopped taking pictures and looked in Maria's direction, but most people thought it was just someone who got too tired from walking around the palace. Maria's vision started to become blurry again. This time it did not clear up when she blinked. The faces around her seemed fuzzy and far away. Her legs felt weak, like they might not hold her up much longer. "Help!" Elena called out in English, her voice shaky with fear. "Please help us!" A few tourists turned to look, but no one immediately understood how serious the situation was. Elena's English was not perfect, and in her panic she was mixing Spanish and English words together. Maria felt the crushing pain in her chest get even worse. Now it felt like fire was burning inside her. She could not catch her breath no matter how hard she tried. Her heart was beating so fast and so hard that she could hear it pounding in her ears. "Elena," Maria whispered, and then her legs gave out. Maria collapsed onto the stone ground right in front of James Mitchell's post. She fell hard, hitting her head on the pavement. Elena screamed as she watched her mother fall. The scream was loud and filled with terror. "Mama! Mama!" Elena dropped to her knees next to her mother. Maria lay on the ground, not moving. Her eyes were closed, and her face had turned a gray color. She was not responding to Elena's voice or touch. Elena shook her mother's shoulders, but Maria did not wake up. The tourists around them finally realized this was a real emergency. People started pointing and talking loudly. Some took out their phones to call for help. Others just stood and stared, not knowing what to do. Elena was crying and calling her mother's name in Spanish. She did not know enough English to explain to people what was happening. She felt completely alone and terrified in a foreign country, with her mother lying unconscious on the ground. James Mitchell watched all of this happen just a few feet away from him. He could see that the woman was in serious trouble. Her lips were starting to turn blue, which meant she was not getting enough oxygen. Her daughter was hysterical and needed help. Every muscle in James's body wanted to move to help, to do something, but he had been trained for 6 years to never break his position. Royal guards do not move unless they are ordered to, or unless their own lives are in danger. The rules were clear and absolute. But as James looked at Maria lying motionless on the ground and Elena crying over her, he knew this was different from anything he had trained for. This was not about protocol or tradition. This was about a human life, Maria was dying right in front of him, and he might be the only person close enough to help her in time. The next few seconds would change everything. Time seemed to stop for James Mitchell as he watched Maria Santos lying motionless on the ground. Elena's cries filled the air, but to James, everything felt silent and slow. His mind raced through everything he had learned in his 6 years as a Royal Guard. The first rule was simple and absolute: never break position. A Royal Guard must stand like a statue, no matter what happens around him. James had seen tourists faint before. He had watched people get sick and fall down near his post. Every time he had stayed perfectly still while other people helped. That was his duty. James remembered his first day of training. The sergeant had screamed at the new recruits about the importance of discipline. "You are not just soldiers," the sergeant had said. "You are symbols of the crown. You represent hundreds of years of tradition. When you put on that red uniform, you become something bigger than yourself." The training had been hard. James and the other recruits had to stand still for hours in all kinds of weather. Rain, snow, heat, cold. Nothing was allowed to make them move. They practiced ignoring distractions. Other soldiers would try to make them laugh, shout at them, or even throw things near them. The recruits who moved or reacted were punished and had to start their training over. James had never failed a single test. He was proud of his perfect record. His family was proud too. His father, who had been a regular soldier, often told people about his son who was a Royal Guard. It was one of the highest honors a British soldier could achieve. But now, as James looked at Maria, all of his training felt meaningless. This was not about tradition or symbols. This was about a real person who was dying. He could see that Maria was not breathing properly. Her skin color was wrong. Elena was shaking her mother's shoulders, but Maria was not responding. James knew about medical emergencies from his army training before he became a Royal Guard. He had learned CPR and first aid. He knew the signs of a heart attack, and Maria was showing all of them. The chest pain, the sweating, the collapse, the blue lips. It all pointed to her heart stopping. The tourists around Maria were confused and scared. Some people were taking pictures with their phones instead of helping. Others were calling for help, but James could not see any police or medical workers nearby. The palace was huge, and it might take several minutes for help to arrive. James knew that in a cardiac arrest every second mattered. The brain could only survive a few minutes without oxygen. If no one started CPR immediately, Maria would die or suffer permanent brain damage. Even if an ambulance came quickly, it might be too late. Elena was crying and speaking in Spanish. James could not understand her words, but he could hear the terror in her voice. She was just a teenager, far from home, watching her mother die. She needed someone to help her, to save her mother, to make everything okay again. James felt his heart pounding in his chest. His hands wanted to move. His feet wanted to step forward. Every human instinct told him to help this dying woman and her frightened daughter. But his training told him to stay still, to maintain his position, to uphold the traditions of the Royal Guard. He thought about what would happen if he broke protocol. He would face a military court. He could be kicked out of the Royal Guard in disgrace. He might even be thrown out of the army completely. His perfect record would be destroyed. His family would be ashamed. The newspapers would write stories about the guard who could not follow orders. But then James looked at Elena's face. She was looking around desperately for someone to help her mother. Her eyes were full of tears and fear. She was just a child who needed an adult to take charge and save her mother's life. James thought about his own mother. What if she was lying, on the ground in a foreign country, dying while people just stood around taking pictures? What if his sister was crying over their mother's body, while trained soldiers stood nearby and did nothing? How would he feel if someone chose to follow rules instead of saving his family? The internal battle in James's mind felt like it lasted forever, but in reality only 30 seconds had passed since Maria collapsed. Those 30 seconds were precious time that Maria's brain was being damaged by lack of oxygen. James looked at his rifle standing perfectly straight beside him. He looked at his red uniform and the golden buttons that showed his rank. He thought about the Queen and the oath he had taken to serve his country. He thought about duty and honor and tradition. Then he looked at Maria again. Her lips were getting more blue. Elena was getting more desperate. The crowd was getting bigger, but no one was actually helping. People were just watching and waiting for someone else to do something. James realized that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules. Sometimes honor meant choosing compassion over protocol. Sometimes serving others was more important than serving tradition. His decision was made. James took a deep breath and prepared to throw away everything he had worked for. He was about to break 6 years of perfect service. He was about to destroy his military career. He was about to bring shame to his regiment and disappoint his commanders. But he was also about to save a human life. And in that moment, nothing else mattered to James Mitchell, except making sure Maria Santos did not die on his watch. The young royal guard who had never broken a single rule was about to break the most important rule of all. James Mitchell made his choice. In one fluid movement, he stepped away from his post. The crowd gasped in shock as the statue-like guard suddenly came to life. James carefully placed his rifle against the palace wall and dropped to his knees, beside Maria Santos. "Move back, give her space," James shouted to the crowd in a clear, commanding voice. His military training took over as he assessed the situation. The tourists were so surprised to hear the guard speak that they immediately obeyed his orders. Elena looked up at James with wide, hopeful eyes. She did not understand English perfectly, but she could see that this soldier was trying to help her mother. For the first time since Maria collapsed, Elena felt like someone knew what to do. James quickly checked Maria's pulse by placing 2 fingers on her neck. He could not feel a heartbeat. He leaned down and put his ear close to her mouth and nose. She was not breathing. Maria Santos was in cardiac arrest and her life was slipping away with each passing second. "Call an ambulance, now!" James yelled to the crowd. Several tourists immediately pulled out their phones and dialed emergency services. James knew help was coming, but he also knew it might not arrive in time. He had to act immediately. James positioned himself beside Maria and placed the heel of his hand on her chest right between her ribs. He placed his other hand on top and locked his fingers together. This was the position he had learned for CPR in his military medical training. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. James counted out loud as he pushed hard and fast on Maria's chest. He had to compress her chest at least 2 inches deep to have any chance of restarting her heart. The compressions had to be done at exactly the right speed, about 100 per minute. Elena watched in amazement as this stranger in the red uniform worked to save her mother. She had never seen CPR performed in real life before. James's movements were precise and confident. His face was focused and determined. Elena began to hope that maybe, just maybe, her mother could be saved. The crowd around them grew larger as people realized what was happening. Many tourists had their phones out, recording this incredible moment. A royal guard breaking centuries of tradition to save a tourist's life was something that had never been seen before. But James was not thinking about the cameras or the crowd. His entire focus was on Maria. "Come on," James whispered to Maria as he continued the chest compressions. "Stay with us. Your daughter needs you." He had performed CPR in training many times, but this was his first real emergency. The pressure was enormous, but James's military training kept him calm and focused. After 30 compressions, James tilted Maria's head back slightly and lifted her chin to open her airway. He pinched her nose closed and placed his mouth over hers to give rescue breaths. He breathed into her lungs twice, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath. Then James immediately returned to chest compressions. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. This was the rhythm that could save Maria's life. James had to keep her blood moving until the paramedics arrived with more advanced equipment. Elena knelt beside James, holding her mother's hand and speaking to her in Spanish. "Please wake up, Mama. Please don't leave me. This nice soldier is helping you. Please wake up." Tears streamed down Elena's face, but she tried to stay strong for her mother. James noticed that Elena was talking to her mother. He had learned in his medical training that unconscious people might still be able to hear voices. "Keep talking to her," James told Elena between compressions. "Let her know you're here." The physical effort of performing CPR was intense. James's red uniform was getting wrinkled and dirty, but he did not care. Sweat was forming on his forehead from the exertion, but he could not stop. His arms were beginning to ache from the repetitive motion, but he pushed through the pain. Some people in the crowd were trying to help by giving advice or asking questions, but James needed to concentrate completely on what he was doing. "Please, step back and stay quiet," he said firmly. "I need to focus on helping her." James continued the compressions and rescue breathing. He counted each compression out loud to keep the right rhythm. His military training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, and that training was saving Maria's life now. After what felt like hours but was actually only 3 minutes, James thought he felt something different. Maria's skin color seemed to be improving slightly. The blue color in her lips was not as dark, but he could not stop to check her pulse yet. He had to keep going until she showed clear signs of life or until the paramedics arrived. Elena noticed the change too. "Is she getting better?" she asked James hopefully. "I don't know yet," James replied honestly while continuing the compressions. "But we're not giving up. Keep talking to her." The crowd watched in complete silence except for James counting his compressions and Elena's voice speaking softly to her mother in Spanish. Everyone understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. This was more than just a medical emergency. This was a moment when someone chose humanity over duty, compassion over rules. James's arms were burning with fatigue, but he refused to slow down. He thought about Elena depending on him to save her mother. He thought about Maria, who was probably a loving mother and teacher with so much life left to live. He thought about doing everything possible to give her another chance. In the distance, James could hear the sound of sirens. The ambulance was coming, but it was not there yet. He had to keep going. Every compression could be the one that saved Maria's life. Every breath he gave her could be the one that brought her back. The Royal Guard, who had never broken protocol, was now breaking the most important protocol of all. The protocol that said rules mattered more than human life. And in doing so, James Mitchell was discovering what it truly meant to serve others. James Mitchell continued performing CPR on Maria Santos as the sirens grew louder. He had been working for 5 minutes now, and his arms ached from the constant chest compressions. Sweat dripped down his face, but his focus never wavered. Elena knelt beside them, holding her mother's hand and whispering prayers in Spanish. The crowd of tourists had grown to over 100 people. Everyone stood in respectful silence, watching this incredible scene unfold. Many held their phones, recording what would soon become one of the most viewed videos on the internet. But James was not aware of the cameras. His entire world had shrunk to just Maria, Elena, and the rhythm of CPR. 28, 29, 30, James counted as he completed another set of compressions. He leaned down to give Maria 2 more rescue breaths, then immediately returned to chest compressions. His red uniform was now wrinkled and stained with sweat, a stark contrast to the perfect appearance he had maintained just minutes earlier. Elena watched James work with growing admiration. This stranger had thrown away everything to help her mother. She could see the determination in his face, the way he refused to give up even when his body was clearly exhausted. Elena had never seen such courage and kindness from someone she had just met. "Please, Mama," Elena whispered in Spanish. "Come back to me. This brave soldier is fighting for you. Please fight too." As James performed the next set of compressions, he noticed something different. Maria's skin color was definitely improving. The gray pallor was being replaced by a more natural tone. Her lips were no longer blue. These were good signs. But James knew he could not stop until he was certain Maria was breathing on her own. The ambulance sirens were very close now. James could see flashing lights reflecting off the palace windows. Help was almost there, but he had to keep going. Every second mattered in a situation like this. Brain damage could occur within minutes without oxygen, and James was determined to give Maria every possible chance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, James continued counting, his voice now hoarse from the exertion and shouting instructions to the crowd. His hands were cramping from the repetitive motion, but he pushed through. The pain. He had been trained as a soldier to push his body beyond its limits, and that training was serving him well now. Suddenly, Maria made a small, gasping sound. James immediately stopped compressions and leaned down to check her breathing. He placed his ear near her mouth and felt a weak puff of air. She was trying to breathe on her own. "She's breathing," James announced to Elena and the crowd. A cheer went up from the tourists, but James quickly held up his hand for quiet. "She's breathing, but she's not out of danger yet. I need to monitor her carefully." Elena started crying with relief. Mama, can you hear me?" She squeezed her mother's hand gently, hoping for any sign of response. Maria's eyes fluttered open for just a moment before closing again. But that brief moment was enough to show that she was fighting to survive. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, but she was breathing. James had successfully restarted her heart and brought her back from the edge of death. The ambulance pulled up to the palace gates with lights flashing and sirens wailing. 2 paramedics jumped out and ran toward the crowd with their medical equipment. The tourists quickly made a path for them to reach Maria. "What's the situation?" the lead paramedic asked as he knelt beside James. "Cardiac arrest approximately 7 minutes ago," James replied in the professional tone he had learned in the military. "I've been performing CPR. She started breathing again about 30 seconds ago. Pulse is weak but present." The paramedic looked surprised to see a royal guard performing emergency medical care, but there was no time for questions. He immediately began checking Maria's vital signs while his partner prepared their equipment. "You did excellent work," the paramedic told James. "Your CPR probably saved her life. We'll take over from here." James slowly stood up, his legs shaky from kneeling for so long. His uniform was disheveled, and his hands were shaking slightly from exhaustion and adrenaline. But Maria was alive, and that was all that mattered to him. Elena looked up at James, with tears in her eyes. She did not speak much English, but she managed to say, "Thank you. Thank you so much." She reached out and squeezed James's hand, conveying more gratitude than words could express. The paramedics worked quickly to stabilize Maria. They attached monitoring equipment to track her heart rhythm and breathing. They inserted an IV line to give her medication and fluids. Maria was conscious now, but very weak. She looked confused and frightened. Elena held her mother's hand as the paramedics prepared to move her to the ambulance. "Mama, you're going to be okay," Elena said in Spanish. "The doctors are going to take care of you. This soldier saved your life." Maria looked at James with grateful eyes. She was too weak to speak, but her expression said everything. She squeezed Elena's hand to show she understood what had happened. As the paramedics lifted Maria onto a stretcher, James suddenly realized what he had done. He had abandoned his post. He had broken the most fundamental rule of being a royal guard. He looked at his rifle still leaning against the palace wall and his tall black hat that had fallen to the ground during the emergency. Other tourists were taking pictures of James, as he stood there looking disheveled and uncertain. The videos they had recorded were already being shared on social media. Within hours, the whole world would know about the royal guard who broke protocol to save a tourist's life. James saw 2 of his fellow guards approaching from inside the palace gates. They had serious expressions on their faces. Behind them walked a senior officer whom James recognized as Major Thompson, his commanding officer. James knew he was about to face the consequences of his actions, but as he watched Maria being carefully loaded into the ambulance, alive and breathing because of what he had done, James felt no regret. He had saved a human life. He had helped a terrified daughter keep her mother. Whatever punishment awaited him, it was worth it. The ambulance doors closed, and the vehicle drove away with its sirens wailing. Elena waved goodbye to James before getting into a police car that would take her to the hospital to be with her mother. James Mitchell stood alone in his wrinkled red uniform, surrounded by cameras and curious tourists, waiting to face the consequences of choosing humanity over protocol. Major Thompson approached James Mitchell with a stern expression. The crowd of tourists watched nervously as the senior officer came closer. Everyone could sense that James was about to face serious consequences for his actions. "Guardsman Mitchell," Major Thompson said in a formal military voice, "you will come with me immediately." James picked up his rifle and his fallen hat. His hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline and exhaustion. He straightened his uniform as best he could and followed Major Thompson toward the palace gates. The tourists watched silently as the guard who had just saved a life was led away. As they walked, James could hear people in the crowd talking about what they had witnessed. Some were praising his heroic actions. Others were debating whether he should have broken protocol. The tourists were taking more pictures and videos, documenting every moment of this unprecedented event. "The whole world is going to know about this within hours," Major Thompson said quietly as they walked. "The videos are already spreading on social media. This is going to be a very complicated situation." James nodded but said nothing. He knew that his decision to save Maria's life had consequences far beyond just his own military career. The Royal Guards were symbols of tradition and discipline. His actions had challenged centuries of protocol and procedure. They entered a small office inside the palace complex. Major Thompson closed the door and gestured for James to sit down. For the first time since the emergency began, James allowed himself to think about what might happen to him. "Explain to me exactly what happened out there," Major Thompson said, taking out a notepad. James told the complete story. He described watching Maria collapse, seeing that she was in cardiac arrest, and making the decision to provide emergency medical care. He was honest about knowing he was breaking protocol, but he explained why he felt he had no choice. "I could see that she was dying, sir," James said. "Her daughter was terrified, and no other help was immediately available. I knew that every second mattered for her survival. I made a judgment call that saving her life was more important than maintaining my position." Major Thompson listened carefully and took notes. His expression remained serious throughout James's explanation. When James finished speaking, the office was quiet for several long minutes. "Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Major Thompson finally asked. "Royal Guards have maintained their positions through wars, terrorist attacks, and natural disasters. The protocol you broke today has been in place for centuries." "Yes, sir, I understand," James replied. "But I also understand that a woman is alive today because I acted. Her daughter still has a mother because I chose to help instead of following protocol." Major Thompson sighed and rubbed his forehead. "This situation is unprecedented. I need to report this to my superiors immediately. You're suspended from duty pending a full investigation. You're to return to barracks and remain there until further notice." James felt his heart sink. Being suspended was the first step toward being discharged from the military in disgrace. Everything he had worked for was being taken away. But when he thought about Maria breathing on her own and Elena's grateful tears, he still felt he had made the right choice. Meanwhile, at the hospital across London, Maria Santos was being treated in the emergency department. The doctors confirmed that she had suffered a massive heart attack. They told Elena that without immediate CPR, her mother would have died within minutes. "The person who performed CPR on your mother saved her life," the doctor explained to Elena through a translator. "The brain damage from lack of oxygen would have been severe if treatment had been delayed even another minute or two." Elena thought about the brave soldier who had abandoned everything to help her mother. She wished she could thank him properly, but she did not even know his name. All she knew was that a stranger in a red uniform had chosen to risk his career to save her family. Back at the palace, news reporters began arriving as word spread about the incident. The videos taken by tourists were being shared millions of times on social media platforms around the world. Royal Guard hero was trending globally as people shared the story of the soldier who broke protocol to save a life. The comments on social media were mixed. Many people praised James as a hero who showed true compassion and courage. They said his actions proved that humanity should always come before rules and regulations. Others argued that military discipline exists for important reasons and that soldiers must follow orders regardless of circumstances. Television news programs began covering the story. Royal experts and military analysts debated whether James's actions were heroic or a dangerous breach of duty. The story was becoming an international sensation, putting pressure on the military to respond carefully. Inside the palace, senior officials were holding emergency meetings about how to handle the situation. This was not just a military matter anymore. The royal guards were representatives of the crown, and their actions reflected on the entire royal institution. Some officials argued that James should be punished severely to maintain military discipline and respect for protocol. They worried that if one guard could break rules without consequences, it might encourage others to disobey orders in the future. But other officials pointed out that James had saved a human life and shown the values of compassion and service that the royal family wanted to represent. They argued that punishing someone for saving a life would create a public relations disaster. As the debate continued, James sat in his barracks room still wearing his wrinkled uniform. He was alone with his thoughts, wondering if he would still have a military career tomorrow. He thought about his family and how they would react to the news. He thought about Maria and Elena and hoped they were both doing well. James had no regrets about his actions, but he was anxious about the consequences. He had devoted his adult life to military service, and the thought of losing that was painful. But he also knew that some things were more important than careers and rules. The next 24 hours would determine not just James's future, but also set a precedent for how the modern military balanced tradition with humanity in an age where every action could be recorded and shared around the world instantly. The young guard who had never broken a rule was about to learn whether doing the right thing would cost him everything he had worked for. 3 days after the incident, James Mitchell sat in his barracks room watching the news coverage of his story. The video of him performing CPR on Maria Santos had been viewed over 50 million times worldwide. News programs from every continent were discussing the royal guard who broke protocol to save a tourist's life. The public response had been overwhelming. Thousands of people were sending messages of support through social media and email. Many shared their own stories of times when someone had broken rules to help them in emergencies. The hashtag #JockRoyalGuardHero continued to trend globally. But James was still suspended from duty, waiting to learn his fate. The military investigation was taking longer than expected because of the international attention the story was receiving. Every decision would be scrutinized by the world's media. On Wednesday morning, James received word that he was to report to Major Thompson's office immediately. As he walked through the palace complex, he noticed that other guards and staff members were looking at him differently. Some nodded with respect. Others seemed uncertain about how to react to his newfound fame. When James entered the office, he was surprised to see several high-ranking officers present, including Colonel Harrison, the commanding officer of all royal guards. This was clearly a very important meeting. "Guardsman Mitchell," Colonel Harrison began, "we have completed our investigation into your actions 3 days ago. Before we discuss our decision, I want you to know that we have received some important information." The colonel handed James a letter written in Spanish with an English translation attached. "This is from Maria Santos, the woman whose life you saved. She wanted you to know how she is doing." James read the letter with growing emotion. Maria wrote that she had made a full recovery and was back home in Barcelona with Elena. The doctors had told her that she would have died without immediate CPR. She thanked James for sacrificing his career to save a stranger's life and said she would be grateful to him forever. "There's more," Colonel Harrison continued. "We also received this." He handed James another letter, this one from Elena, written in both Spanish and English. Elena had written about how terrified she had been, and how James had appeared like an angel to save her mother. She said that James was her hero, and that she would never forget his kindness. James felt tears forming in his eyes as he read Elena's words. Knowing that Maria was healthy, and that Elena still had her mother made everything worthwhile. "The doctors at the hospital have confirmed that your immediate action saved Maria Santos's life," Colonel Harrison said. "Without CPR performed within the first few minutes, she would have died or suffered permanent brain damage." James nodded, still holding the letters from Maria and Elena. "Now," Colonel Harrison continued, "we must address your breach of protocol. You abandoned your post and disobeyed direct orders about maintaining position. These are serious violations that normally result in dismissal from the Royal Guards. James's heart sank. Despite the positive letters, he was still going to lose his career. However, the colonel said, we must also consider the extraordinary circumstances. You faced an impossible choice between following orders and saving a human life. After careful consideration and consultation with senior officials, we have made our decision. The room was silent as James waited to hear his fate. Guardsman Mitchell, you will not be punished for your actions. Instead, you are being commended for your quick thinking, medical skill, and courage under pressure. Your actions brought honor to the Royal Guards and demonstrated the values we truly stand for. James could barely believe what he was hearing. He was not being punished. He was being commended. Furthermore, Colonel Harrison continued, we are implementing new guidelines for Royal Guards. While maintaining position remains the standard protocol, guards will now be authorized to break position in life-threatening medical emergencies when no other help is immediately available. This was unprecedented. James's actions had not only saved Maria's life but had also changed military policy for future generations of Royal Guards. You will return to duty tomorrow, Major Thompson added with a smile, though I suspect your post will be busier than usual for a while. Every tourist in London wants to see the famous Hero Guard. James felt overwhelming relief and gratitude. His career was safe, and he had helped create positive change in the military. But most importantly, Maria Santos was alive and well. 2 weeks later, James received another surprise. Maria and Elena had returned to London specifically to meet him again. They were given special permission to visit him at the palace during his off-duty time. The reunion was emotional for everyone involved. Maria hugged James tightly and thanked him repeatedly in both Spanish and English. Elena presented him with a handmade card and a small Spanish flag as gifts of appreciation. You gave me my life back, Maria told James through a translator. You gave Elena her mother back. We will never forget what you did for us. Elena, now much more confident with her English, told James, you are my hero. You showed me that good. People exist everywhere in the world, even when we are far from home. James was deeply moved by their visit. Seeing Maria healthy and happy and Elena smiling instead of crying confirmed that his decision had been absolutely right. The story of James Mitchell became a symbol of choosing humanity over bureaucracy. It was taught in military academies as an example of moral courage. It was shared in schools as a lesson about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. James returned to his duties as a Royal Guard, but he was forever changed by the experience. He had learned that sometimes the most important rules are the ones written in our hearts, not in military manuals. He had discovered that true honor comes from serving others, not just following orders. Months later, when James stood at his post, outside Buckingham Palace, he continued to maintain the tradition and discipline expected of a Royal Guard. But now he also knew that if another Maria Santos needed help, he would not hesitate to act again. The tourists who visited the palace often asked to see the Hero Guard, and James became a symbol of compassion and courage. His story reminded people that even in a world of rules and traditions, human kindness and the value of life must always come first. James Mitchell had saved more than just Maria Santos's life that day. He had saved the idea that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is what makes someone truly heroic.